welcome. And this is the first of this kind that I've been involved with David and the Conservatory. But KDFC, the radio station in the building, is very proud to be part of this whole dream David and the team has had about their influence on classical music in the world and the community locally. And I'll introduce everyone here to you. I'm Bill Lueth, President of Classical California, KDFC, also Vice President of Classical California throughout California. That's including LA. It sounds like I could have prepared what my title is a little better. Yeah, I don't usually say it. You know David Stahl, who is the president here of the Conservatory of Music. Lara Downs, we were just talking, she has, I don't know how many titles we could give her, but she's a touring pianist. She's KDFC's resident artist, so she does concerts for us in schools. She does them upstairs with a series on the 11th floor that we call Sky Concerts. She also is a pentatone artist on the record label. She does a million things, and she's the evening host, 20 hours a week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 12 on KDFC and KUSC across the 10-station network. So, and she does Orange Theory, by the way. So very impressive.
Right now.
Yes. And then Donagh Collins, my newest friend, coming to join us from London. You've traveled the furthest. He is the CEO of Askonas Holt and Opus 3, which is the rep firm, well, you'll be hearing lots more about what he does. And also Sean Hickey, my old friend, who I have not seen for a long time, Managing Director of Pentatone, the record label that the Conservatory has also acquired. So one of the big questions we tackle is, why is the Conservatory acquiring a management company and a record label and partnering with a radio station? We're going to get to that. I'm not going to start with the why. I want to pull the camera back a little further. David's going to love this, because while we have a provocative title of Can Classical Music End Its Love Affair with Crisis? A Conversation About Inventing the Future of Music, which we will solve all of that in 45 minutes. The core of the issue is the classical music world, by its very nature, has always struggled with maintaining its core audience and developing the new one. Everybody wants that as long as it's what they like. And so that is always hard to do, is build the future while maintaining the present. So what do we do to bridge that gap? David has some very provocative ideas that he shared with our senior team last week about even redefining what is classical music. So let's start with that bigger question and how we're looking at the future of classical music through a lens that may not be as tight as it might have once been. David?
Wow, Bill. Well, I'd like to small over the little questions first. Exactly. No, I think that all of us working in the arts, generally, all of us that have responsibilities for these organizations, and the Conservatory is 105 years old. Actually, it's interesting to hear Askonas Holt. Its roots go back to the 1800s in England, as a matter of fact. So these are
1876, I think.
Exactly. So these are organizations that have been with us for a long time. The notion of crisis, though, is something where I think it's at the heart of the matter. I think there are two things about that. One, the issue with classical music is always implies somehow that it is a frozen art form that should never evolve, and that we're preserving something that was the greatness of our humanity and shall never be matched again. Therefore, we worship at this altar. And I think that that's always been a challenge of both perception, both internal to our field, how musicians perceive the work, and how people externally perceive us. And the challenge of that, for one thing, is it leaves many, many, many communities on the globe and in this country out of that bubble. That's one. The second thing is, ironically, the canon itself was all created by world-class innovators in their time. Great improvisers. Bach was one of the greatest improvisers of all time. The last thing he would have imagined doing is having his work disregarded, in favor of Josquin's, for example. That would have been lunacy. This was true for Mozart, Beethoven. All the people that we see that we identify as classical artists. But the reality is that I think the challenge now is recognizing that we shouldn't think about it as classical music. We should think about it as music, and music of quality. And I tend to refer to it as music of quality and enduring importance. And the reason is because that is music that can be found across the globe, in all cultures across the world. We don't necessarily take all music that was created with us, and that's fine. It lives in the moment. But some of it becomes iconic. It's close enough to our humanity that it endures beyond time. It survives the blowtorch of time. And I think what's important about that perception is that it allows us to recognize that we are undervaluing both people and creators and the music itself, and the art form has to be that much wider. So that's a central issue, just to identify it for a moment, that we all are faced with. The second issue about crisis has more to do about how we tend to think of ourselves. And if I Google you to go out and just Google crisis in classical music, and I'll tell you what you're going to find right away. You will find at least 4 books. One about the crisis of music education in America, one about the crisis of symphony orchestras in America, one about crisis of classical music overall. And then if you keep going, you'll actually find about a crisis of music in the Renaissance, actually. And it's also the crisis of music of Josquin. It goes back, crisis has been part of the canon for 600 years, actually. And I do a talk often where I lead with an article published in the New York Times that identifies the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, the Cleveland Institute, Peabody, Juilliard School, Curtis Institute, Manhattan School, New England Conservatory, all gathered in New York at the Juilliard School. And the title is Major American Conservatories to Close Within 6 Months. And that the presidents of the conservatories came together because in the absence of and the infusion of millions of dollars, it is certain that they will shut their doors. And that article was published in 1970. We're officially 53 years into an apparent crisis that we're going to shut the doors of the conservatories. And I tend to parallel that against, for example, I would ask somebody in 2007, what do you think will collapse first? Lehman Brothers, valued at that time at $634 billion, worth more than all of classical music worldwide as it's defined, or the New York Philharmonic. And everyone says, I would have bet on the New York Phil. Well, it's still here today and they're building a new concert hall. So our challenge is we tend to recognize that music really does matter, that we find ways for it to persist. But I think we've reached a point where we should move past the fact that it's in crisis and recognize that that's farthest from the truth. It's at the threshold of opportunity, but that opportunity does pivot on us recognizing it needs to include more of the world, more of the people who can celebrate it, and make it accessible to those who need it because it does build community. So those are 2 very broad observations I'll attempt to bring together, but much of what we're doing at the Conservatory now is designed to respond to, first of all, what is classical music and how can we imagine it differently, and can we move past this culture of crisis and poverty into one that is about thriving and actually prospering in the future.
Right. And Lara, I know, I know personally how you approach the radio show and your radio career and your concert career of not redefining classical, but you found so many interesting things in the nooks and crannies that people have missed, and you've been able to showcase to expand what is classical music from your perspective.
I mean, I always quote Duke Ellington, 2 kinds of music, good music and the other kind. And I really try to stay away from the word classical, because regardless of what it means to me, I know what it means to other people, and that can be very problematic. I just want to share with David that yesterday I was on the phone with a planning group for an artist residency that I'm starting in the fall, and they asked me, well, if you had been a student and you had been able to ask, someone like yourself, what would you have wanted to know about your possibilities? And I said, joking, I probably would have asked if there were other kinds of schools I could go to, because the conservatory was the most rigid, confining place I've ever experienced. So my other answer would be I might like to go to a school like this. Bringing all these things together, it's essential. And redefining all of the things and how they interconnect. So your question about repertoire, right? I mean, I think it actually goes back to my days in the conservatory when I was sitting in a hallway full of practice rooms listening to everybody play the same handful of pieces, and that seemed insane. Because what were you going to do?
Right.
Play it faster, louder? I don't know. And so I started looking, off of that very beaten path, and I found so many things that spoke to me, that reflected me, that gave me a different reality as an artist. And then I very soon found out that those things that were meaningful to me, forget about me because they were meaningful to so many other people. Yeah. And so I'm on this constantly widening journey.
Well, I have to think about the old practice. I love hearing the practice rooms right now when I come out of the radio station and all the variety that we hear. But it used to be, who just plays it better? Because the competition was to play the same thing better, and that's not really at the heart of it anymore. It's now how to express yourself. And when you're managing artists, I assume the vision for what an artist wants to get out of this and how to get a career off the ground has shifted as well. based on what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, as David mentioned, Askonas, Holt, and indeed Opus 3 artists in New York, we come from a tradition of representing artists very much in the classical sphere, very, I guess, quite boxed into that sphere. And we come from a background of impresarios who presented classical music, and it was very much classical music. You'd be proud to represent string quartets and symphony orchestras, and of course individual artists who come out of that very structured background. And let's not get away from some of that too. I mean, we still represent some of the wonderful orchestras who will thrill you with a Mahler symphony or a Beethoven symphony, and there's no one suggesting there's anything wrong with that. But I think the artists of today that we're continuing to represent, and indeed looking to represent to the artists of the future, which I'm sure we'll touch on, they are certainly artists who are of today, who are able to communicate why they have found what they believe to be the music they want to interpret and perform, how they can define themselves as being different in terms of the narrative that they want to tell, and how they can broaden the sphere of how we do define what classical music is, whether we call it classical music or not. What is it, and how do we make sure that we're opening and throwing open the doors of concert halls and bringing audiences to classical music radio stations of the future who want to find what we're at, but they feel more included in what we're able to present. And it's not always about, I think, repertoire. Of course, it is also about finding repertoire that's been ignored over the years for all the reasons we might know, in terms of race or in terms of gender. But I think also in terms of how we present what are concerts of the future, and how we throw it. There are some concert halls around the world who, they open the doors half an hour before the performance, and you present yourself at the right time, and you have your subscription, and you go to your seat. And actually, there are other concert halls where you can find yourself in the lobbies and in the public spaces, and you almost don't know that you're in a concert hall. And I love that. I love the fact that the cultural spaces of the future should just be part of our community and our people, and we're beginning to welcome people in, and that then when they actually do find themselves in what I think often should still be an acoustic space where you can really get away from the busyness and disruption of life today. I think that's okay to have still that meditative space where you do find yourself in a good acoustic, but that the actual performance then might be brought to you in a different way. It might bring a different perspective. It might involve artists who come from outside of our bubble. It might break down some of the things that everyone always assumes everybody knows about classical music. It might actually take some steps back and explain why this particular performance is including whatever repertoire it is including on that particular evening, or give some just personal notes as to why that particular performer or soloist wants to show us that particular music in that moment. And you can leave with this sense of having been included in something, and you might actually go away and reflect on why you enjoyed that particular performance in the way that it was presented, or how it was interpreted for you on that particular evening. And it wasn't just another night at the opera or another night at the symphony. I think it's relevant also for radio. At least back at home, you can so often have this formula where it's, and now comes the concertmaster on stage, and it can be a bit like the same, no matter what the repertoire is. It's a little bit, and you're sitting at home going, well, there must be another way to just help to show that this art form is continuing to reflect the fact that there are audiences who are looking for something a little bit different and new. So we're representing artists who are right at the center of classical. We don't apologize for that, and we're always looking for fabulous talent of the future, whether it's operatic singers, conductors, whatever it might be, touring orchestras around the world. But that we're able to represent artists who can explain why they're choosing the repertoire that they want to perform, and that the interpretation and the passion that they can bring to how they actually deliver it in that live moment is something you'll take with you home afterwards.
Right. And Sean, how does that resonate for you from a record label, and how it used to be, and how you think about producing things now with artists?
Well, I mean, just like David said, people have been writing the eulogy of classical music for, I guess, hundreds of years. And in addition to that, in the recording industry, they've been writing a subset of that eulogy for all this time. And I think we're all proof that we're not quite dead. Rumors of our death are grossly exaggerated. think Mark Twain said. I mean, this all folds in because, I mean, I think that, much of the history of what we would probably all agree, consider to be classical music has been funded on or supported to some degree by a model of patronage of some kind. So if it's the Esterházys and Franz Joseph Haydn, up to the present, and how all the forms of patronage have kind of supported the work that many of these broader industries do, whether it's concert presentation, broadcast performance, radio, record labels. And when David and I first met a year and a half ago, and we talked about, some of the, at that time, some of the initial steps of this broader vision, I got quite excited about the whole thing because I've been in the recording industry for about 30 years, and there's a real mystery, and has been a real mystery, about how a record label can really, a classical label can really truly survive and fulfill its mission of supporting artists and trying to, be profitable. This brings together all the things that I love and respect about it: education, performance, music management, and the label and distribution piece of all of it. And we're not all that far from the patronage that we've had from hundreds of years ago, but I don't think that, we at Pentatone, I mean, we take a much broader, at least since I've been here for about a year, a much broader look at what is classical music. It can and should include everything. It should be as wide as a world. I believe what David said about music of great quality and enduring, timelessness. That's enough for me. Notated music doesn't matter. Working with this composer or this artist or whatever, it doesn't all that matter. If it's something that's truly enduring and it really, fits our, kind of way of looking at, what we would want for the label, that's fine for me.
Right. What I like about this group is we don't normally have these conversations, but it came up at a Sphinx meeting recently in Detroit, where some label representatives and artist representatives were there saying, we really don't know what people like, it's harder to know. And I'm like, well, the radio station does that. That's what we know. That's the world we live in, is programming 24 hours a day. So to have these kind of conversations of what does the artist want to express, what do they want to do and learn to be, and what do people want from an artist, is a full circle a vision, I think, that we can have in a modern world too, that helps with the crisis around classical music. Let's shift to your favorite subject, David, which is, why did you do this? Why did you create this thing beyond a conservatory that's now inclusive of these two gentlemen and what they offer?
Well, first of all, I do have to say, this is about the team. There is the organizations that work together do have aligned values, and that really does matter. Donagh certainly, Sean certainly, the folks at Opus 3, we have Rob Retta's here. Everyone lined up around the fact they recognized that there were unmet opportunities here. If I were to say why often, quote, classical music has a difficult time, it's because we're terrible business people. Just, hello. And one of the examples I use is that, not only are we obsessed with crisis, but I often say, the truth is we are not as smart as dairy farmers, and my staff gets great. I use this example all the time because this was invented here in San Francisco. It was literally, and I say, because, dairy farmers figure out we need a Got Milk campaign. But we can't figure out as musicians, we need a Got Music campaign, And the fact is that campaign led to all kinds of increase in production and what have you. But we aren't good. We feel like there's something embarrassing about lining up around the importance of what we do. And then we wait for others to evangelize for that importance, and then we're disappointed when they don't. And that's how we arrive at the threshold of a belief that we're in crisis. And it's a very interesting way for us to step past our own accountability as artists or leaders for making sure that music is a central part of culture. It needs to be essential. It's essential to life. Many people, I would suggest, find their spiritual life in music. Children, we know it's essential to their development. It's not a secondary consideration. The science confirms these truths for us. But then we're concerned that no one else is taking action when, in fact, it is our responsibility. It's ours. We have no one to hold accountable beyond ourselves. So why did I do this? Because one morning I realized if I don't begin to see accountability and a pathway forward, how are we going to do this? Well, the business sector gives us all kinds of tools, and because in the nonprofit world and in the arts world in particular, it's like, oh no, business, don't trouble us with that. We just want to put money in. The problem with that is There is much to be learned there. And the first thing that any any market does is it finds the most efficient means of distributing the things that people want. Whether that's good or bad, however you feel about it, that's really true about it. And the fact is that conservatories are very fortunate. We're sitting in the resource of this conservatory, this recording studio, the housing we have upstairs, the wonderful concert halls we have. We have world-class engineers right here in the room today who work full-time for the conservatory. There's a radio station housed in the conservatory, right? And we're generating these students whose goal is to what? To be in this profession. Well, who would they most like to learn from? Well, not just the great artists of the world, but the people who run these companies that manage and create art in the world. And then when you look at the companies themselves, realize that they need places for research and development. How does an artist come up with a new idea and workshop it? For a record label, often record labels, do they own recording studios and have engineers? No. They're out renting, buying, desperate to get these things all the time. Do they have mechanisms for philanthropy to support their work? No. Typically, they're for-profit organizations, though you need a benefactor to support a recording. So the corporate structures are incorrect. The resources are not connected. And the conservatory would be to say, my gosh, what do we want? Well, we want these artists being in here and doing their work so our students can be next to them and learn from them and network with them. When you start to think about it in those terms, I find, at least in my perception, there's a verticalization of the structures which begins to make sense. Where you say, look, we can help the management companies invent the concert experience of the future, and by doing that, we can include our students in that activity, but more importantly, teach them the importance of that. Teach them how we do it. They may not end up on a touring production that Askonas Holt sends out on the road. That's a very small microcosm of what will happen here, but they're going to have the benefit of learning from what that experience looks like. Suddenly, Pentatone can capture these experiences right here for pennies on the dollar because it's in this studio, and all we have to do in the digital universe now is grab hold of it. Anyway, Don, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to give my perspective on that, because we're new now in the Alliance, and only since the beginning of the year. But absolutely, what David has just said from the point of view of the management company, to be part of that broader family, to be challenged in new ways, to have different brains around us saying, why don't you think about this? Why don't you diversify in this way? I mean, we say there is no crisis. I truly believe that. There is not a crisis, but there is, as we've been speaking about, there is the responsibility to do more and to think about how we can challenge ourselves as we go forward and bring the new audiences of the future. So the exactly as David said, I just wanted to echo the access to resource here, the brain resource, the ability to raise money around projects, the ability to use the physical resource of this place to incubate projects of the future and to bring artists here, to make better use of when artists are in town, when they've blown carbon dioxide, to be on the other side of the world for a few performances at the wonderful San Francisco Symphony or at the opera. Why not have them come in here and mentor students? Why not come in and use some of their expertise in their time whilst they're here? So that we David and I, and in collaboration with Sean and the other constituencies around, I think we've really believe in where we're going, and we've made some great headway already in the few weeks that we've been formally doing this in terms of how we can bring to bear this, and believing in our vision going forwards is to bring with us artists of the future who want to be managed by our companies, who want to be recorded by our companies, and who want to make the best of the resource here at the Conservatory. So I would say so far so good.
Well, and on top of what you're describing, and I relate to this when we were a commercial station, shift to a nonprofit. Now that you're in that space, and you are too under this new business, how has it changed how you look at the recording industry?
Well, it's really fascinating for me. I mean, I've been as I mentioned, in it for a long time. I've almost always been on the distribution, sales, and marketing side, as well as management, but never truly in running a record label. And it's truly one of the mysteries to me. And I'm learning it now and answering my question, how does a label make money? And I hadn't known it for my first 29 years in the business, and now I'm kind of figuring it out, or starting to. And one of the ways that we kind of envision it, and we talked about this morning and a bit yesterday with the board, is what does our future look like? Are we going to be truly a nonprofit? Will be a for-profit underneath the umbrella of this consortium of companies? Not all of which is really going to be answered right now. But the important thing for us is to really think you use the word incubate, incubate the projects and the ideas that we want to have. I've been very frustrated in much of my career in that the sort of classical music ecosystem, which is pretty broad, has always existed in very, very separate silos. Very separate. So concert presentation, record labels distribution, radio, a couple of other things. And up until really 4, 5, 6 years ago, and certainly now with what we're talking about here, none of them talk to one another.
Right.
Yeah.
You might talk to the presenters, right?
Absolutely.
I did not.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried. Like, we've tried for a lot of years to really, forge partnerships and alliances with the presenters, and that we represent artists, at least in their recording life, on the artist side. But that's been just a constant frustration. Now those barriers are really starting to fall down a little bit. And the thing that really needs is I think, is just to really kick it over. And what we're talking about here with the Alliance is something that really kicks it over and says, here's the piece that maybe somebody wasn't thinking about the whole time. Education, kids, young people, the future of classical music, the great artists of the future. And, I always go back to, 30 years ago, I walked out of college with a degree in composition. And for me, it was, well, now what? And I didn't know. I got really lucky. I worked hard, sure, but I got really lucky. I didn't know. The kids that are coming out of the SSCM, they're going to have a better understanding of all of the broader music ecosystem. And that to me is very exciting. And it's exciting, when I think of them, I think of my younger self, but it's also exciting for me as a business leader of one of these companies to say, all right, how are we really finding ways to really enmesh all of this activity?
Yeah, great. There's going to be some time for questions, so if you're thinking about those, put those in your mind. We'll come back to you in a second, but there's a reason Lara sits in the middle here, multiple reasons, not just because of the cool vest. But she was a student, conservatory student. She mentors and teaches young people. She is a performing artist. So she has that connection. She is a recording artist, and she's on the radio. I mean, so she actually is all of this. So
Together.
all of it, and one person,
The
and
linchpin.
and goes to Orange Theory. So tell us about just your reaction to what you're hearing them talk about.
You. Yeah. When we talk about this crisis culture, I admit that I have to credit the crisis culture for the artist that I became, right? Because I think that there has been for a long time this message that innovation is necessary in order to, survive out of this dying culture in crisis. So for me, that's true, but I think that your strength doesn't have to be your trauma, right? So if I had access to all these, I'm sitting here thinking about, over the course of my career, all the places that I've had to innovate and look for the dots to connect, in the ways that I learned by myself. Well, if what I want to do is perform and there's a body of work that I want to present in live spaces, then I also need to record that work, and I also need people to hear that, that work on the radio. And so that means that the concerts that I'm programming also have to be connected in a storytelling sense to my recordings, and my recordings have to be positive content for radio, I learned that, right? But this was all self-taught. And the idea of students coming up in a system that shows those ropes and that encourages innovation within a supportive structure, the possibilities are so endless. Because the students that I interface with, they're all innovative. I mean, musicians, generally speaking, are innovative and creative and curious. And they feel confined until they get out of school, and then they say, and now what? So it's really, it's transformative.
David, I know you have feedback on something specific she talked about, of allowing students to express beyond their classical expertise.
Right.
And that's a vision you have as part of this, but also separate from this. Can you speak to that for everyone?
The Conservatory, in 2014, it's now 10 years ago, set a course where we said, look, we're interested in being a very unique institution and also harnessing where we are. And if I were to say, what is it that the Bay Area can bring in an extraordinary way is the concept of innovation risk-taking. That it's okay to do that here. And honestly, that's not always true across the East Coast, to be candid. And I think in many conservatories it's difficult. So in launching the Technology Applied Composition program, we started training composers to score for film and games. That has been wildly successful. The Roots Jazzed American Music program. What happened was, it wasn't just these became majors, they became part of the cultural experience of the conservatory. And we conjoined that with this space that we call winter term, which is January, which is where students either participate in or lead projects. Because all of our work is really project-based work. You know, if Donagh's doing a tour, it's a project. It has deadlines, it happens, it ends. You know, if Lara's making a recording, it's a project. You have a radio show, it's a project. There is very little in the modern world today which isn't project-based. But conservatories aren't, we're good at a senior recital project, but what happens is we're highly didactic, especially historically. You're going to play the Waldstein Sonata, this is the tempo and the exposition, the end, right? You know, I mean, there was a lot of, still is a lot of that. What this alliance, we talk about education opening up new ideas for presenting and the record label, let me tell you what happens on this side. It's very easy in a conservatory or any institution of higher learning to replicate the next year what you did the previous year. Because maximally, from your point of view, the content is only 4 years old, then it's all new again. Because you graduate everybody. Yeah. Now, on one hand, that can cause you to feel brilliant for the rest of your life. Because, you know, hey, we got a new batch of students, and they don't know anything that I know. The huge liability is that can go on for 50 years without change. And I'm sorry to say it, but that's happened in many sectors of American higher education. Now, as the president, as our dean, as our faculty, these two individuals, all these individuals, even the radio station being here is like, well, that's nice that you want to teach that, but this is actually where art is within culture now. This is what is succeeding now. These are the artists and the ideas they have that are happening now. We're required by association to pay attention to the present. And that's the irony of all this. The idea of classical music, the canon in a conservatory is about us looking back over 600 years, whereas our job is to prepare our students to look forward. Inevitably, it requires us to shift our searchlight around and be informed by that tradition, but not governed by it, to be inspired by it, but look forward. And in that process, we all start to prosper. Because just as we can be the crucible of new ideas that may be recorded or toured, you know, we could immerse this room in video imagery and put artists in every corner and put the audience in the center in a circle looking out and create a performance. And I bet there are a number of patrons of the symphony, if we did that right, would step into this space and say, I haven't been inspired that long in any way for a long time. But how does Askonas or the record label have the resources to experiment with that? Well, we can. So I would just point out that this is a feedback loop. What Laura's saying is right. I went through the conservatory model, so did Sean. You know, I've been through these institutions, learned a great deal, it inspired me, but when I reflect on that, I realize there are just things now we have to give our students that we haven't historically given them.
Yeah. Great. How am I doing on time? I can't find the clock. Oh, there it is, right in front of me. We're good. So, Donagh, I had a question for you related, obviously, to all of this. David's talking about looking forward, making sure to shine the light in that direction. In a perfect world, 10 years from now, what looks different from your perspective based on what you're trying to do now with this model? What has changed, and what are you hoping stays the same?
So I hope that, I mean, from a business perspective at the company, I hope that we'll be attracting the next generation of talent that will want to be part of this alliance. They'll want to be part of all the synergies that we've talked about today, and they'll want to be a part of something which is thinking about a different way, looking to the future in the way that David just described. I hope that we'll also be doing some of the work that we've done over many, many years in terms of touring great orchestras around the world, in terms of facilitating great artists to perform around the world and to develop the careers of artists into the long term. I hope that we'll be able to work with artists such that they'll be able to tell their stories more easily, that they'll have a facility and a resource that will allow them to open themselves up to say, I actually always wanted to be able to do this, and now I kind of know where that might begin. We've had visionary artists on our roster who've already achieved that. You know, Joyce Donato, for example, feeling passionate about a particular topic. In War and Peace, a major project that she delivered a few years ago. Eden, which is her major project at the moment, focusing on the topic of Mother Nature, singing arias and commissioning works in that area, but wanting to bring to bear a whole array of activity around that project. It in itself is a production. I think producing is maybe a new word in our space. We talk a lot about management, about touring, about projects, but actually helping to produce and bringing together all of the various constituencies that make the production possible, the event that goes beyond a wonderful talent singing on stage with an Italian Baroque ensemble, but actually bringing, in her case, bringing choreography and videography to that performance as well. And that there'll be other artists who'll be inspired by those ideas, and they'll know that actually this could be a place where there'll be the resource that will allow them to do that, because it's not inexpensive in terms of time and money to put those things together. And it takes a long time to be able to recoup back that money in terms of them being able to tour those projects and present them to the presenters who are looking for new content. And we're, just to touch on something we talked about earlier, we're a for-profit. We're proudly a for-profit. We're back in profit, thankfully, after
back to being a for-profit.
That crisis. But actually, for me, the philosophy, the idea of being under the umbrella of a not-for-profit, while still being able to make a profit, but reinvesting those profits back into the future of what we want to do, feels to me like a really, it takes a little bit of time to kind of process that, but actually it's a really beautiful way to represent truthfully the fact that we sit in a subsidized world, whether it's through private philanthropy or which of course, as you'll know, in Europe more often is through public subsidies, which are somewhat, in some places, in crisis and are definitely decreasing year on year. And then we have to face up to some of these crises. And so to be able to continue to make profits and to reinvest those profits back into what we hope will be those kind of projects of the future. For me, that's what I hope that we can achieve.
Great. And the production concept you're talking about, like with Joyce specifically, she also has a recording that she put out that's around that. Lara has played that on her show. So, again, we're getting a connection here, a ecosystem that makes more sense,
Exactly
in this room.
that. It's a virtuous circle.
Yeah, and Sean, when you look now, your 10-year vision, what has changed based on this discussion for you and what you hope for that future that's different than maybe now?
Well, I would like first to just say that we'd like to have the relationship with artists that we have that we don't always have, but we're beginning to now. And you mentioned earlier that Lara is a Pentatone artist recording for us. I mean, her record, Love at Last, comes out in a couple of months, in April, next month. And we're very excited about it. But when we first talked about it and met on it about a year ago, Lara explained her vision behind the whole thing. And it's a record that has a vision, has a reason for existing. And I mentioned her and the guitarist Sean Shiba, who also comes to us with very innovative, very fascinating ideas. He's probably the most exciting guitarist in the last 10 years, in my opinion. But you contrast that with all of the other submissions that we get every single day of someone who has gone to great lengths to record the Hans Werner Henze solo viola music, and will I release it on Pentatone? Well, what is the vision there? What's the rationale? What is behind it? Make no value judgment on the music whatsoever. But for any artist that we have that we work with, we want to know that there is something that they're invested in. And if they're truly not invested in it, how can I and my team really find that sort of joy and inspiration and really, trying to work it and bring a recording to its sort of greatest potential? So, I see a lot more of that. I want to see and work with more artists that have that vision. And then as we were, certainly more than intimating here, what are the resources of our sister company and our parent to really inspire and utilize all of the resources that we have together that haven't been tried. The record label, I don't view the competitive landscape of record labels as being other record labels. I never have. I think it's ridiculous that other than Blue Note in the US and maybe Deutsche Grammophon in Germany, record labels are not brands. They're not Coca-Cola. They're not Apple. And we're competing with anything else that you're going to spend your time doing. Netflix, doom scrolling on Twitter, whatever else you're doing. Like, that is what we're competing with. And that's, I think, what we're all doing all the time. There's so much content, to use a pejorative word, sounds like a potato chip, out there in the world that we have to compete with. We want to work with artists that have a much bigger and broader vision. If you're going to take 60 minutes of your time to listen to Lara's records, it better be meaningful, and it is. And we want to have a lot more of that in the future. I think we will see that.
Yeah, and that makes sense, like you're thinking about who's it for, too, as part of that, right? Not just as the person came to you and said, I want to put this particular composer on a record and release it. That's not considering how it will have an impact in the universe. And I know you think about this when you're putting together both your show, your concerts, your records. What's your reaction to that, and how you see yourself in 10 years, other than being a superstar radio person?
Well, you said that we're bad business people in this industry, and we're also bad storytellers in this industry, I think, across the board. And I know that I use the word too much, but for me, this really does all come down to storytelling. As artists, as recording artists, what is the story that we want to tell? And by the way, that vision for the record, now, we talked about the vision, and the vision informed the music, and the music is now on that record, and now I get to tell that story for the next, 12 months, and proactively, which is another thing that the students all need to learn to do. And I think that the reason that I love this radio gig is because it forces me to be so creative with my storytelling. And think about what matters, what matters, what moves. It helps me in the way I think about the music that I play and the way that I program the music that I play. I think that the entire field needs to contain story, because story is what comes to the fore when we're talking about community or audiences or redefining any of these things. Who are we telling the stories for? We just broadcast the radio premiere of Omar from LA Opera, and I went down to LA on opening night because two friends of mine wrote that opera. And I was sitting there thinking about all the pieces that had come together to make that thing the incredible success that it was. And really it all boiled down to storytelling, from the really good marketing to the ways that the creative team was telling that story over and over again, to the story itself that was at the heart of the opera, which is a new story that reflects so many people who never would have thought of going into the opera house before. So I think that the stories we tell about the new work, the new stories that we tell about the old work. Absolutely. I mean, the canon doesn't need to go anywhere. We just need to treat it differently.
And just to amplify that, I mean, you see at the Met these days, the Metropolitan Opera in New York, Yannick Nézet-Séguin, what he's doing with Peter Gelb in terms of telling new stories through opera. I was at Puts Us the Hours last season. You couldn't get in the front door.
And to amplify that, because Don and I were there together that night. It was the last night of the performance. And here was the thing. This is when the Met Opera House ticketing system had crashed.
Oh, yeah.
It was, you couldn't theoretically buy a ticket to the opera, and the Met was sold out.
Yeah.
Okay, they've been begging to sell out for ages.
That's storytelling.
And this is storytelling where on a rainy night, no joke, stormy night in Manhattan, where you can't buy a ticket online, the story was powerful enough, to Laura's point, to pull you into that space because you wanted to hear the story. Yeah. We have to accept the truth that if we don't tell stories at this level with that kind of power, that kind of relevance, and believe me, the canon is perfectly capable of that. Mm-hmm. It's just we as the conservators, if you want to go back, as now let's say the progenitors of that, have to take that responsibility seriously. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to come back to any other industry. No one believes that they are privileged not to adapt.
Oh, right.
Nobody. Nobody sits back. Believe if you're making phones or canisters or whatever it is of milk, you have to adapt to survive. Mm-hmm. And that's just simply. That's just morning, noon, night, get out of bed in the morning. If my company, my business doesn't adapt, and for some reason we've always felt that we're immune to that truth. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been one of the liabilities. But as soon as don't look at that as a threat, but an opportunity, and we see it as an opportunity and say, you know what, why can't we be optimistic about that? Then you get Omar, then you get The Hours, then you get, it's a rainy night in Manhattan, you can't buy a ticket, and yet everybody's there.
We get so lazy about this so fast. So I'm pretty well known for my connection with the music of Florence Price. Everybody learned about Florence Price about 5 minutes ago.
That's right.
And we're telling the same story over and over and over again. And when I say telling the same story, I mean the way that, when I play with the Philadelphia Orchestra, if you're not careful, the marketing is going to be always the same. She was the first black woman too, but I don't want that's the beginning maybe of a story, or maybe it's the end of the story, but the fullness of the artist, of the music, of the story takes effort.
Exactly.
Great. Well, we've got time to take some questions if there are any. I think we can see you out there. Just raise your hand, or don't be shy. Come on, Randy. I know you always like to jump in there. Yeah, no?
Yeah, he's raising his hand.
Do I see him?
I'm here, but I don't know how to formulate the question. But with all this new digital, and kids are only listening to 10, 15 minutes or small little snippets, how does an album fit into that, a 60-minute something? How do we get to kids who want a much shorter, quicker experience, to get them into the music so that maybe then they'll listen to a longer period? I'm not sure what the question is.
No, it's a good question.
You record an album with 2.5-minute tracks, just like the Beatles did.
No, but no joke. I mean, okay. Do you want the real short tracks? But story. I mean, honestly, story. So, if you're going to experience this album as an album, which you may not, you might hear one track on a playlist, and that's fine. But if you're going to approach it as an album, then you have already a cover and a title that are telling a story, and we are really careful that the first 10 or 12 minutes of this thing are going to suck you in and you're not going to go anywhere. And then you might want to stay till the very end, because that's when you get the audio track with my liner notes essay that I wrote, that I then, So I think that it's, and also kids, by the way, are listening to vinyl. So they're totally into the experience of the thing. So yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like either way, the way that I craft an album, I'm okay either way, if you're there for the whole story or if you're there for a chapter.
Yeah, and I think, we think about getting kids involved with things. The first thing we have to do is make sure that kids have access to organized programs in public schools, in every school in America. Yes. Period, the end. Okay? Because that's where we're going to expose them to these ideas. They don't even know that it's there. And we need to be first in line making sure that that's true. Do they discover Lara's album in the 7th or 8th grade? I don't know. Could they discover it in 25 years? The answer is yes. That's actually one of the beautiful things about digitalization now, is that we are preserving these wonderful things in ways that we never could before. The other side of it is again, coming back to storytelling, we have our fantastic head of social media here, Corbin, looking here. He's done a great job building the social media presence with SFCM and Beth and Mark. The entire team been wonderful and actually creating now what is, I'm not exaggerating, the dominant force at conservatories in the world in a social media landscape. One of the things that really set off, it's a highly controversial platform right now, but TikTok, the TikTok sensation of SFCM, ironically, was one of our horn students preparing to play the legendary solo of Tchaik 5, which for those of you who know how that entries, it's a very soft, lush string texture. And it's not a concert, it's a rehearsal. You hear the conductor in the background, and it's just shooting down the aisle at this kid as he prepares to play this entrance. And he starts to breathe, and his colleagues lean back, and he starts to come forward. And I can tell you from having played an orchestra for a long time, it is truly the visceral human sensation that Olympic athletes feel, that we feel, that any artist feels. It's very difficult for the audience to feel that. And what you see in this social media experience is the incredible human moment that it is to generate art. And it went viral. What's the total millions of hits, Corbin?
9.6 million.
9.6 million views of Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony and the horn solo. Now, when was the last time that 9.6 million people listened to Tchaik 5? But that moment was an entry point. We have to become more sophisticated in saying that every time a student sees that, gets excited about that, what's the next step in social media? How's it reinforced in a public school classroom? Then they find themselves perhaps better prepared to engage with this next level, which would be a complete story that Laura's going to tell you with this recording. But we have to perceive the process in a way that connects all those dots, or we're going to miss the opportunity. So that's really the answer to the question, I think, is a comprehensive effort that extends up and down, which is why we have started this continuum of verticalization to create the connective textures of education all the way through the production, dissemination, and accessibility of the art form.
And we, to pick up the point earlier, I think we as management companies, we don't fully understand the recording business. You know, we are siloed, have been. And of course we work with artists who work with many of the record labels, but to really understand what makes it tick going forward, what makes you want to choose a particular idea or a particular recording. I think the point you made earlier, Bill, about understanding better what works on the radio, we could learn more about what audiences are reaching out for in all the different territories. And we, again, to the point of speaking to each other, learning from each other, and being colleagues and listening to each other. I think there's that has to be our future together.
Yeah. Any other comments on the?
Just to go back to the question a little bit, I mean, in the recording industry, there's been all this malaise around the sort of development of streaming. And from an economic perspective, an economic model, there's reasons to think that is problematic. But the opportunity, I'm sorry, I am utterly in the minority, I think, in this in some ways. But the opportunity in there far outweighs all of what we had before. I said this yesterday in a board meeting about how the record industry in its first 100 years really relied on sort of planned obsolescence. Every 12 years, a new format was introduced. Everybody went back and replaced what they had before. And that happened roughly once a generation for the 20th century. In 2006, streaming launched, Spotify launched, and now we have the world's music in our pockets for either nothing or $10 a month if you don't want ads. And for all the people that come to us, whether they have a story or not, the vast majority of them are going to discover music the way we all do now, which is on our phones, which is on all the ways that we can really access it now. We don't necessarily need to have the ownership model as a listener when the access model exists for us. And the access model is the world of streaming. 99.999% of all the people will discover Lara's music, even though I know we're going to sell a bunch of CDs, on all the platforms. It's as simple as that. How many have in the singles so far?
Yeah, I know.
6 million? 4 million?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
In a month?
Yeah.
6 weeks?
Yeah.
So there's nothing in the world of the sort of physical world that really kind of approaches that. And all of these people are discovering this music, following her, and these are things that just did not exist a number of years ago. And we're all for it. This is just a way of sort of obliterating all the silos, all the genre silos. I have an 18-year-old daughter. Like, genre to her, it is utterly foreign. Yeah. Completely. Or she'll come up with all these genres that none of us have ever heard of, like mall soft and whatever, and this crazy hyperpop and all these things that people feel like compelled to put, genres on things, but they really don't exist for teenagers. They don't. Like in the world of classical music, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them. They're going to discover what they discover, as long as we're doing our work and presenting them with valid recordings, valid content, to use that deplorable word, out there competing with everything else out there. Your Netflix, your doom scrolling, your everything else.
Great. Other questions?
I have something I just wanted to say, which is, I think that so much of our effort goes to the intentional listener, right? The ticket buyer, the album buyer. My favorite listener is the accidental listener, right? That's what I love about radio. Because you could potentially hear a piece of music for not even a full minute and have that transform your day and potentially your life and certainly your relationship to the music. And so I wish that all of the stories that we tell and the outreach that we try to do, the widening that we do, could really have that accidental listener always at the heart of our intentions.
Yeah, great. Did I see a hand in the middle? No. I don't think I see anybody. If you
Don't be shy, you guys.
Yeah,
Come on, you
just-
can throw a question at us out there.
throw something, 60 minutes at David.
Oh, now there's 3. There we go. Jim was first, I think. No, whoever.
I promise I'm not a plant. Oh, it was a recording. Kristen Clare, professional development engagement. When we're looking at the next generation of what we're up to, are there any character traits or skill sets or things that you would hope your industries will be taking on as you employ the next generations of who might lead these industries that are in our ecosystem?
Yeah, I will be really brief. I'm actually not here to participate that much, but on the radio side, the storytelling aspect and an authentic personality, not just a great set of pipes of the old days, but somebody who actually can set up a reason why I want to listen with you and hang out and discover something and get context. That's definitely part of where radio continues to head in our world.
I got into what I do actually through being in youth orchestra and finding a way through there that, well, first of all, the experience of being in youth orchestra it's an incredible thing, not just musically, but also socially, and breaking down so many barriers at that age. And I think maybe today isn't the day to talk about it, but on a separate note, I think if there is a crisis, it's about what David referenced earlier. It's about getting people in early stages to be able to find a teacher, find an instrument, be able to afford tuition, and to have support such that people do end up in youth orchestra, playing works which involve maybe more than 2.5 minutes at a time. Learning about a work which can take longer. But anyway, that's maybe another topic for another day. But for me, it's people who have experienced the thrill, and it can be in any genre or any type of music, whatever we want to define that going forward, but who have experienced the thrill of what it is to perform music or to be in a room with live music, and who want to bring that to bear in terms of representing talent of the future and discovering talent of the future, and really being comfortable and wanting to be people who facilitate that. They're happy to be on the side of the stage. They don't want to necessarily be in a spotlight, but they want to be able to facilitate talent and to find a way to help to tell the story that artist wants to tell. And it's not easy to find those types. It brings in the managing companies, we have to have a certain humility, I think, as well, to be at the service of talent, of individual talents. We have to be thinking in the long term. You have to be very efficient. It's a really broad set of skills. A lot of it also comes back to common sense, as so many things do. But for me, it's that mix of being able to work efficiently and well and at the service of artists, but also to have yourself that sense of the thrill of a performance and understanding how important it is to get everything right such that a performer can be a performer.
Also to be a good therapist.
Yeah, maybe so.
That's true for all of our jobs, by the way.
Yeah. David has mentioned to me before something that I find fascinating, of the way he looks at the student of the conservatory and of the future, and you can expound on this, David, is looking for people who will be a good citizen of the world, regardless of what they end up in, whether they end up playing the violin in a professional orchestra, or they end up in managing your record labels, or, well, you are the violinist in the orchestra, sort of, or in your job or my job, or unrelated, they become doctors, lawyers, teachers, whatever. That is a really important part of how you view the whole self coming through the conservatory here.
Yeah, I think like musicians inevitably are good listeners. They have to empathize with one another. They're passionate about something which everyone has told them is not likely to lead to a lot of money in life. They tend to be willing to do it anyway. So that means they're more values driven often. And because of that, they tend to gravitate towards opportunities in life to have an impact. I think for us, we want students who do care about the impact they have in the world, but we also want students where not only are they bring creativity with them, but our responsibility is not to shave off the creative edges in the pursuit of technical development. That's been Conservatories have not always been great at recognizing the creativity of an individual and letting it flourish. And we've just seen some incredible students these days who, if you just are a little bit, just take the binders off and say, hey guys, it has to be a really high quality in craft, but we'd like to see creativity. It is remarkable with just a little bit of tinder, how that fire can take off, And I'm more and more interested in seeing that, because one of the things that I've often said, and it's been controversial, and frankly I've been shouted down a few times. In talking about, for example, the League of American Orchestras, the leadership training seminars, or when we talk about leadership academies, one of the qualities I'm often looking for in candidates is imagination. And I've had people say to me, no, first they have to know what it is to be a good manager. They've got to know how to manage. Like, manage to what goal? Manage to what end? To what place? To what space? In the end, if they don't have a strong imagination and respect this incredible creative act that music making is, and value their colleagues in that way, and are energized by that work, which I think Donagh has reacted to, is the way great managers persist in life is they actually are energized by the work of the artists. That's the truth of it. The best ones are, the best people running labels are energized by the work. I'm energized by the work of our students. I played for a long time and taught for a long time, and I love doing both, but I'm energized by the enterprise. So imagination, that level of energy, the willingness to work unbelievably long hours, again and 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 again. But if you're not energized by it, then don't do it, because everybody up here, right here, sitting across this group, it's not for the faint of heart. So I think a lot of that is just, are you prepared to not just have a vision, but then do the very hard work to execute it? And I think that's, in the end, if you want to see what I think is necessary for the leadership of these organizations, where the symphony, the opera, we have wonderful colleagues in this city and across cities in the U.S., is not just the idea of where to go, but being willing to do the work to get us there. And that's the combination, the two forces of nature that have to exist in a person, I think, for them to lead these organizations in the 21st century.
Right. We have come to our hour, but I'm sure we'd be happy to hang out a little bit if anyone wants to come up who's too shy to ask a question or didn't get their question answered. But thank you for coming to join this group. Thank you to the guests who put their time in to talk about this. It was fun. Thanks.